Hi everybody. Okay, let's mark up an image in Photoshop. This is for beginners for an assignment where we're analyzing the composition. Now I got this image off the web, and what I did was I went and found the image that I wanted, and I right-clicked on it and I copied it into my paste buffer. Okay, and I made sure it was big enough, 1200 by 600, and I went over to Photoshop and I did File, New. Okay, you can do that longhand, or you can do Command N, and you'll see it says, oh, you want to paste what's in your paste buffer? And I say yes. Okay, I'm going to do Command V. You can do all this longhand as well, but I would encourage you to start using the keystrokes. It's a lot faster. Okay, double click the hand, it'll fill the screen, it'll fill the workspace. Double click the magnifying glass, it'll show you what it's going to look like on your screen at that resolution. Let's do this. All right. So we want to divide this into thirds. Now, to divide it into thirds, we need some measurements, right? Okay, Command R. That would be under your view, rulers, right? And you can see here, this is 1200 pixels wide. So I go over here and I say 1200 divided by 3 is 400. All right. So let's get your brush. Now we know, on 400 we're going to draw a line down, and on 800 we're going to draw a line down. Now let's go to our brush. Here you can see my paint chips, black and white. We're going to use white. We can change those colors, of course. By clicking on that chip, but I don't want to get too far along. Again, this is for absolute beginners. I want white in the foreground. Click on your brush tool. We could use the line tool, but again, it's one more thing to have to learn. Let's just use the brush for now. And we want a small brush. We don't want this giant brush. Now here's a tip. Hold down your Option and your Control keys and scroll to the right. It'll make your brush big. Scroll to the left, it'll make your brush small. So how small do we want it? Let's make it about like that. Okay. Super important here. Let's add a layer. Now let's see, I'm kind of in the way there. Okay, let's see if I can move me down. There we go. Move me down. Let's move me over here for now. Okay, we're going to add a layer. Why do we add a layer? Because we don't want to draw on this image and then make a mistake and go, oh my gosh, I've got to start over. We're going to add a layer by clicking this little plus sign down here. And think of it as a sheet of tracing paper. Take the brush. We're going to go over to the 400, right? Hold down your Shift key and you'll make a straight line. Watch, if I don't hold down my Shift key, it'll do that, right? One of your best friends is Command Z. That's undo. Hold down your Shift key, get on to 400, draw a line down, right? Go over to 800, draw a line down. Whoops, well, don't do that. you gotta, actually have to start your brush there. Okay, hold your Shift key. All right, there's two of those lines. Now, what's the height on this? 550? 500, 550. I believe so. 600. Okay, so what's 600 divided by 3? Right? 200. Elementary school math. All right, so 200. So I'm going to go over here to the 200. 150, 200. And I am going to take my brush, and hold down my Shift key. And over here, I'm going to hold down my brush, hold down my Shift key. Perfect thirds. All right, now here's a trick. The numbers at the top of your keyboard can change the opacity. So if you don't want this to be so overbearing, right, then hit, on this layer, maybe hit, you can hit your 5 or your 6 or your 4, whatever it is, so that the information that you're overlaying on this image doesn't get in the way. All right, you can also do that right here, opacity. You You can adjust your opacity. Okay? Now, we've got the rule of thirds. Remember, in this assignment, you want to be able to discuss the rule of thirds and whether this image utilizes the rule of thirds in its composition or not. Remember, too, in the rule of thirds, it's either the focal point has to fall on one of these intersections, or the horizon line or a main element has to fall along one of these horizontal elements. You can also have a main element along the vertical. But don't remember, if the focal point's too big and it falls outside of that intersection, then it kind of goes against that rule. But anyway, I don't want to get into the rule of thirds here. We've got other lecture material related to that, but I've divided this into thirds. I can see here that the table is perfectly aligned with that lower horizontal line. So when I present this, when I take this marked up image and I put it in my Word document and I start writing about this image and all the elements that it's incorporating, I'm going to say it does use the rule of thirds in its composition in the placement of the table. All right. Now, what else? Eye lines. Now, this gets a little tricky because, again, there's different tools I would love to show you in terms of making this, really beautiful. But for those beginners here, if you wanted to mark the eye lines, what we don't want is to have a whole bunch of lines everywhere and different colors and things. You could add another layer here. Okay. Eye lines. Eye lines direct the viewer throughout the composition. So when I look at this guy, I want to see what he's looking at. It's human nature, right? Christ is looking down here at his hand. I'm looking down at his hand. There's a lot of eye lines here. Do I want to mark it up, or do I just want to mention that in my composition, right? Now, I could mark up some of these. So I have to make kind of a judgment call. Do I want to change the color? Maybe. Remember, we're going to change the opacity. So, when I do this, it's going to make a big red mark. I think in my analysis, I'm going to say there's so many eye lines here, and I'm going to note them down in my written component, but I'm going to mark some of these. Okay. So, there's an eye line. Whoops. There's an eye line. And you can see that if I start putting lines for all these people where they're looking, it's just going to be a mess. Would it be better to just have a red dot where I could tell that, in my written component, I could say, hey, I've marked all the important eye lines that are directing the viewer in and around and through the composition. I could do something like that. I could do something like that. Whoops, sorry. With the brush tool, it will, if you don't pick up, it will create a line. It'll start drawing a line. Just like that. There's another line. There's another eye line, right? Another eye line. So I could just say in my written component, I've marked just a few of the eye lines that are directing the viewer in this composition. I'd probably also talk about the hands directing us through this composition. Okay, what else? I will show you a little trick here. Let's create another layer because I didn't want to get too advanced, but I do want to emphasize this line here, this 1-point perspective. Do I want another color, or is that going to make it too complicated? Let's go for another color. All right. Now, I want to draw a line along the top of this here, showing that it is directing us directly towards Christ. Here's what I'm going to do. We're in a new layer here. I'm going to draw a line, holding down my Shift key. All right. And I'm going to do Command T, which is transform. And then I'm going to move it to the angle that I want, hit return, hit V on the keyboard, which is the move tool, use my arrow keys along with the Shift key to move that down. Okay. Do I need to do this a lot? Do I need to clutter it up? In my written component, I'll say I have marked just one of the lines in 1-point perspective that's directing us towards the face of Christ. Okay, so you can see here a really clean markup. I've delineated the rule of thirds, and I'm going to discuss whether it uses the rule of thirds or not. I have marked where the eye lines that I'm going to talk about. Okay, and then I have also marked one of the lines of perspective that I'm going to talk about in my written component. Now, let me show you what a finished analysis would look like. Well, before I do that, let us export this. All right, I'm going to bring myself back up here. So, what do? You go to Photoshop, you say File, and I personally, there's so many ways. The easiest thing, I like the legacy. I'm going to do Export, Save for Web, and I'm going to save it as a high quality JPEG. I also like PNG files a lot, right? PNGs. Okay, so I'm going to save this. Okay, I'm going to hit save. I'm going to name it Last Supper, and then I'm going to drag that into my Word document. Okay, so let's save that. Boop, 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 boop. Let's save it to the desktop. Last Supper JPEG. I don't like spaces. It's old school. Last Supper JPEG. Boom. Now, what does a resulting assignment look like? Now, this person, was a little bit more advanced. They used the line tool with the arrows and the 1, 2, 3. They're talking about the main focal points, and that's something that I forgot to put on that image. Let's go back to Photoshop real quick. So, what's your main focal point? Now, you could draw this in. Add another layer. You can draw this in, or you can use the text tool. I don't want to use the text tool right now because it's one more tool you have to learn. Obviously, Christ is the primary focal point. Do we need another? Do we need another color? I don't want to get. Remember, we don't want. This is going to look really funky, but that's the primary. What's the secondary focal point? Do you think? Primary focal point. Gosh, there's so many. I mean, when you look at this, it's just so busy. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, this is the secondary focal point. And then I'm going to, make a case for this being the tertiary focal point. It looks kind of funky. It looks kind of like a crayon there. I could make this smaller. But the important thing is, you do want to be able to discuss in this composition what the primary, secondary, and tertiary focal points are. Where's the first place your eye goes to? Where's the second place your eye goes to? And where's the third place your eye goes to? All right. How's the eye move in and around and through this composition? All right. In the end, this is what we want. I'm going to show you how to do this real quick. You're going to take your JPEG, right, or your PNG file. You're going to place it into a Word document, and then you're going to write about it. This person said, this is a French painting. The main focal point is the woman who's breastfeeding. Most of the gazes and angles lead to her. You see, there's kind of like a real comprehensive analysis going on. This person's looked at this and analyzed it. And here's also the citation. Don't forget the citation, right? I'm going to have to put the citation in there. So how do you do this? You open up your Word document, or in my case, Pages, because I'm on a Mac. I'm going to drag over my marked up image. You'll notice that this is the one that where I didn't do the primary, secondary, and tertiary focal points. I'm going to maybe resize it, right? And then this is where I can start writing, right? I can say Last Supper. Remember, you should look up your citations, but this is Da Vinci. This is Da Vinci, Last Supper, fresco. You want the date, you want the location, all that good stuff. Here's where your analysis comes in. You're going to say, uses, rule of thirds in placement of the table, right? And then you can go on eye lines. Boop, boop, boop. Write about the eye lines, right? Tell us about, what's going on in the composition. Perspective. 1 point. 1 point. 1 point. Directs the eye to the main focal point. Focal points. Right? Primary, secondary, tertiary focal points. Right? You see where I'm going with this? I don't want to take all this time to do it, but you've got the image, you've got the citation, you've got, yes, it does use rule of thirds, or it does not use rule of thirds. You've got the eye lines direct us in and around and through in a certain way. You've got the perspective directs us towards the primary focal point. Okay, the primary focal point is, Christ. The secondary one is, I've marked on there. You see where I'm going? You want to do a nice analysis so that in the end, you end up with something like this. The image marked up, a description, the image marked up, a description, the image marked up, a description, right? Does that make sense? Let me know if you have any questions.